I used to think I had it all. The house with the ivy crawling up its brick walls. The husband whose laughter filled every room. The kind of life that looked perfect from the outside. And maybe that was the problem. It only looked perfect. My name is Sora, and for 10 years, I built my world around a man named Daniel. A man who once told me, "You'll never have to worry about anything again." He was right, just not in the way I hoped. Back then, Daniel was everything I thought I wanted. Ambitious, confident, the kind of man who could command a room with just his smile. I met him at a charity gala. I was 26, working as a freelance interior designer, and he was the new financial director for a tech firm that was taking off. He talked about dreams, travel, legacy, love, and I fell for it all. Our wedding was small, elegant, just close friends and family. My mother cried. My father said Daniel had good eyes. For years, I believed I'd found safety. We built a life together in a suburb, just outside the city. A 2-story home with a white porch swing and lavender along the fence. I spent my days decorating it, making it warm and full of life. Daniel said he loved coming home to it. To me. But over the years, something shifted. His work consumed him. Late nights turned into weekends away. And when he did come home, he was different, cold, distant. I tried to bridge the gap, planned dinners, left notes, stayed patient. But Daniel started treating me like I was part of the furniture. One night, he came home past midnight, smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. When I asked, he just sighed and said, "Sora, don't start." That was the beginning of the end. He started locking his phone. His words turned sharp. I'd find lipstick smudges on his shirt. Not mine. Still, I wanted to believe he'd come back to me. That this was just stress, not betrayal. Because admitting the truth would mean my perfect life was never real to begin with. But lies have a way of unraveling. And mine began with one notification I wasn't supposed to see. It happened on a Thursday night. The kind of night when the air feels heavy, like it knows something you don't. Daniel had left his laptop open on the dining table. He'd stepped out to take a call, his voice low and sharp. Drifting in from the porch, something inside me, something tired, something hollow, told me to look. For years, I told myself I wasn't that kind of woman. The kind who snoops, who doubts, who lets fear drive her. But that night, curiosity wasn't fear. It was survival. The screen glowed in the dim light. His email inbox was open. I didn't even have to search. The messages were right there. Subject: last night. From Lydia B. My breath caught. Lydia, his assistant. The one who always called me Mrs. Sora, with that fake politeness that made my skin crawl. I clicked. You left your tie at my place again. I guess that means you'll have to come back tonight. My hands trembled. There were more. Photos, plans. A message from Daniel that said, "You know how tense things are at home. I can't wait to be free of this. Free of this." That's what I was to him. A burden. The world tilted. I remember my pulse roaring in my ears, my throat closing, the room spinning like it couldn't hold the truth. I closed the laptop just as he stepped inside. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing my face. I looked at him, the man I'd loved, the man who once said forever. And I realized forever had an expiration date. "How long, Daniel?" I asked quietly. He froze. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I said, my voice shaking. "Lydia, the emails, the nights you worked late. How long?" His expression changed. That flicker between guilt and arrogance. Then he laughed. Not out of humor, out of superiority. "You went through my laptop," he said, as if that was the real sin. I couldn't speak. My silence must have angered him, because he slammed his hand on the table. "Do you realize how paranoid you sound? Maybe if you weren't so insecure." Stop. My voice was calm now. Just stop lying, he exhaled, the performance fading. Fine, he said flatly. Yes, Lydia and I are together. You happy now? I wasn't. I was numb. Daniel. Why? He shrugged. You changed. You used to be fun. Now it's just constant nagging, drama, routine. Lydia understands me. I laughed, a sound I didn't recognize. She understands your bank account, maybe. His eyes turned cold. You should be grateful. I'm not throwing you out right now. I felt something inside me snap. Throw me out? He leaned back, smug. You have nothing, Sora. The house, the accounts, the car, they're all in my name. If you make this messy, I'll make sure you get nothing. And that was the end of the conversation. He didn't shout. He didn't hit me. He just walked away, like discarding a broken thing. 2 weeks later, divorce papers arrived. No alimony, no property, just a cold signature line waiting for mine. I thought about fighting, but lawyers cost money I didn't have. And Daniel's firm had all the power. My family had passed away years earlier. I had no one, so I signed. When the movers came, they boxed up his life, not mine. My wedding dress, my keepsakes. Even my dog went to Lydia. I left with 2 suitcases and a broken heart. The day I walked out, rain was falling, soft, unrelenting. Like the sky was mourning with me. I stood at the curb, watching Daniel close the front door behind him. He didn't even look back. I slept in my car that night, parked behind a supermarket. The next night, I sold my wedding ring. The world didn't end in one big explosion. It ended quietly, with indifference. For weeks I drifted, couch to couch. Then a women's shelter took me in. The beds were narrow. The air smelled like bleach and sadness. But the people there, they smiled. Broken, but kind. That's where I met Nadia, a volunteer who always said, "Life's funny. It breaks you to rebuild you differently." At the time, I didn't believe her. I remember sitting by the shelter window one night, looking at the city skyline in the distance, wondering if Daniel and Lydia were toasting champagne in my kitchen. I wanted to hate them, but mostly, I hated myself for loving a man who saw me as disposable. And yet, beneath that pain, something new began to flicker. A strange, quiet kind of resolve. Because when you've lost everything, you stop fearing loss. And that's where my new story began. Not in comfort, but in ruin. Little did I know, the universe was already conspiring, planning the cruelest, most poetic twist of all. A twist that would start with something small. A crumpled piece of paper in an old jacket pocket. A forgotten lottery ticket. The first few weeks after I left Daniel were a blur of cold nights and cardboard coffee cups. I learned how to pretend I was okay, how to smile at strangers, while hiding the fact that I had nowhere to go. You never really understand how loud silence can be until you wake up in the back seat of your car, alone, watching the sun rise through a fogged windshield. Some mornings, I'd park near the beach just to hear the ocean. It reminded me that the world was still moving, even if I wasn't. At the shelter, everyone had their story. There was Clara, who fled an abusive marriage with 2 kids and a suitcase, and Maria, who lost her home after medical bills drowned her. They didn't ask me what I'd lost. They just offered me coffee and company. One night, as we sat together, folding donated clothes, Clara said something that stuck with me. The hardest part isn't losing what you have. It's losing who you were. And that was true, because I didn't recognize myself anymore. I used to be Sora, designer, wife, dreamer. Now I was just another woman with nowhere to go and no one waiting for her. There were moments I wanted to give up, to let the darkness swallow me whole, but then I'd see small flashes of light, like Nadia handing out extra blankets, or the way Maria hummed lullabies to her sleeping children. Kindness was what kept me breathing, But even kindness couldn't stop the slow erosion of hope. When winter came, I started staying at the public library during the day. It was warm, quiet, and no one asked questions. I'd scroll through job listings on the library computer, typing with trembling fingers. No one wanted to hire someone with no address. Then one afternoon, when the rain had been falling for hours and the world outside was grey and unforgiving, I reached into my bag to find my gloves and pulled out something else, an old denim jacket, faded, frayed at the cuffs. It used to be my favourite. Something I wore during road trips with Daniel. Back when laughter came easy, I almost threw it away, but something made me check the pockets. Inside was a crumpled piece of paper, a lottery ticket. For a moment, I just stared at it. The numbers were barely legible, smudged from time. I remembered buying it months ago, before the divorce, when Daniel and I still played the what if game. What if we win? He used to say, I'd buy a house by the sea. I'd reply, and he'd laugh. You already have one, silly. That house was gone now. But the ticket remained. It was dated nearly 3 months ago, and my heart sank, thinking it was probably expired. But the small voice in me whispered, check anyway. The next morning, I walked to a convenience store near the bus station. The clerk, a man with tired eyes, scanned the ticket and froze. He looked up slowly. Ma'am, you might want to sit down. I blinked. Why? He turned the screen toward me. Winning numbers. 07, 11, 19, 25, 36, 42. Jackpot. $42 million, my ticket. Those were my numbers. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. Then the world went quiet. Not the silence of emptiness, but the kind that comes before something divine. I remember my knees giving out. The clerk had to steady me. You okay? He asked. I wasn't. I was in shock. I'd gone from sleeping in my car to holding a piece of paper worth $42 million. The irony of it was cruel. The same jacket I'd worn when Daniel said I looked homeless had just made me a multi-millionaire. I walked out of that store, shaking. The rain had stopped. The sun had broken through. The kind of sunlight that feels like forgiveness. That night, back at the shelter, I didn't tell anyone. I just lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling like my life had split in two. Before the ticket and after the ticket. I went to the lottery office the next day, heart pounding. They confirmed it. Real, valid. 42 million. They took me into a private room, gave me water, walked me through the process. They asked if I wanted to go public. I said no. I didn't want Daniel or anyone to find me again. When they asked what I wanted to do first, I didn't even know how to answer. I'd been poor for so long that the idea of having money, that kind of money, didn't feel real. But one thing was certain. I was going to rebuild, not to show the world, but to reclaim myself. I hired a lawyer through the lottery office's referral, a woman named Elise, sharp, discreet, kind. She helped me create a trust fund under a new name, Aurora Foundation. Within a week, my new life began. A small apartment overlooking the ocean, a new wardrobe, a sense of safety I hadn't felt in years. The first night in that apartment, I made dinner for myself. Nothing fancy, just pasta and wine. But I cried the entire time because I realized it wasn't about the money. It was about choice. I finally had it back. No more begging for love. No more waiting for validation. No more being invisible. The next morning, I donated $100,000 anonymously to the shelter that had taken me in. And for the first time in years, I smiled without pretending. The woman who once lost everything now had more than she could ever imagine. But I wasn't done, because while my life had changed, the ghosts of my past still lingered. Daniel and Lydia were still out there, thriving for all I knew, living off my pain, laughing at my downfall, and maybe once I would have let it go, but not anymore. I wasn't the same woman who walked out of that house in the rain. I was stronger, smarter, and I had something they couldn't buy. Time, power, and silence. They'd never see me coming, and soon, they'd learn that fate has a wicked sense of balance. Because when you break someone who loves you, sometimes the universe hands them the tools to build their revenge. And mine. It was just beginning. I used to think transformation was sudden, like flipping a switch, but it's not. It's slow, quiet, and often painful. It's waking up every morning and deciding you'll no longer be the woman who accepts less than she deserves. In the months after winning the lottery, I became someone else. Not through money, but through freedom. Elise, my lawyer, helped me build an entirely new identity. Legally, I was now Aurora Lang, founder of the Aurora Foundation, a charitable trust that specialized in women's empowerment and small business grants. In reality, it was my shield, my sanctuary. No one connected Sora, the broken ex-wife, to Aurora, the enigmatic new investor. I moved to a coastal town 2 hours from the city, a place where the sea met the cliffs and the wind smelled like renewal. My apartment had wide glass windows, a small balcony, and the kind of peace that didn't feel real at first. Every night, I'd sit by the balcony with a cup of tea, watching the sun melt into the horizon, and whisper to myself, "You survived." But survival wasn't enough anymore. I wanted to live. With Elise's help, I began learning about investments, real estate, and asset management. What Daniel once mocked me for, my curiosity about finance, became my strength. I devoured books, attended workshops, learned how to make money work for me, not define me. Within a year, the Aurora Foundation wasn't just a front. It was a thriving entity funding shelters, small art studios, and women entrepreneurs across the region. I stayed out of the spotlight. My name was on no interviews, no photos, just the quiet power of someone watching from the shadows. And yet, I couldn't stop wondering what Daniel was doing now. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. It's the first step toward revenge. So, one evening I searched his name. His company's website had changed. The leadership page listed him still as CEO of D&L Financial. But the last few press releases were desperate, mergers that failed, lawsuits, employee layoffs. Then I saw it, a small headline, buried in business news. D&L Financial faces audit over mismanagement allegations. I almost laughed. Karma doesn't need an invitation. But the real twist came a few weeks later. Elise had arranged for me to meet a real estate broker named Adrian to help me invest in some properties. As he showed me listings, one particular address caught my eye. My old house, Daniel's house. The listing photos made my chest tighten. The porch swing gone, the lavender bushes dead, the paint peeling. It looked empty, like a shell of what it once was. "Why is it for sale?" I asked, pretending not to know. "Owner's business is struggling," Adrian said casually. "Rumor is he over-leveraged his assets. Divorce, new wife, debts piling up. The usual story, the usual story." I smiled faintly. "I'll take it." Adrian blinked. "You haven't even seen it." "I don't need to. I bought the house under Aurora Lang's name, paid in full. And just like that, the home Daniel once kicked me out of belonged to me again. I didn't move in right away. I wasn't ready to face those ghosts yet. Instead, I began restoring it, quietly, elegantly, piece by piece. I hired designers, landscapers, local contractors. I told them I was renovating it for a friend. Every time I visited the site, I walked through those hallways and remembered the woman who once cried in the kitchen, begging a man to stay. She was gone now. In her place stood someone unrecognizable, composed, deliberate, untouchable. By spring, the house looked beautiful again. Not like before, better, warm, alive, full of new energy. One evening, as I was leaving the property, I saw a familiar car drive past slowly. Daniel's silver BMW. Lydia was in the passenger seat. They didn't see me. Their faces looked strained, older. Lydia's once perfect smile was tight. Danielle's hairline was receding. I heard from a mutual acquaintance later, someone who didn't recognize me, that Lydia's shopping habits and Daniel's failing business were sinking them fast. Debt, arguments, whispers of infidelity, the same cycle repeating itself. That night, as I sat on the balcony of my coastal apartment, a thought came to me so clearly, it made me smile. He taught me betrayal. Now I'll teach him humility, but not through destruction, through control. The next morning, I called Elise. I want to start acquiring some local assets, I said. Small businesses, properties, anything with growth potential. Any particular area? She asked. Yes, I said, my voice steady. Where Daniel operates. Within 6 months, Aurora Foundation had quietly purchased 3 of D&L Financial's client contracts through intermediaries. His company's cash flow began thinning. Slowly, subtly, like a leak he couldn't locate. Meanwhile, I became a silent investor in the very firm that audited him. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And I was done being silent for the wrong reasons. One evening, Adrian invited me to a high-profile charity auction downtown. A gathering of wealthy investors, CEOs, and socialites. The kind of event Daniel used to drag me to. At first I hesitated, but then I thought, what better place to see the look on his face? So I went, a black dress, diamond earrings, hair swept back. When I entered the hall, conversations hushed just a little. It was strange. The same kind of attention I used to crave when I was with Daniel now came effortlessly, and then I saw him, standing near the bar, talking to a potential investor. His posture was still confident, but his eyes, they looked tired, worn. He didn't recognize me. Of course he didn't. To him, Sora was gone. Throughout the evening, we crossed paths more than once. His eyes lingered, as if trying to remember where he'd seen me before. When the auction began, something poetic happened. One of the featured items was a luxury art piece, the kind Daniel once boasted about collecting. He started bidding. I joined in. Every time he raised the bid, I raised it higher. Calm, measured, unblinking. When the final hammer fell, the piece went to me, for triple its value. Daniel looked at me then, confusion flickering behind his smile. He didn't know it yet, but his entire world was now orbiting mine, quietly, invisibly, perfectly aligned for what came next. That night, as I drove home, the city lights blurred outside my window. I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't rage. Not anymore. It was peace. Because revenge, I was learning, isn't always about destroying someone. Sometimes, it's about showing them how effortlessly you've risen without them. And Daniel was about to learn exactly that. You can always tell when karma is about to make her entrance. The air changes. People who once walked tall start to stumble, and those who mocked your silence suddenly begin to whisper your name. It started with a phone call. Elise speaking, she said when I picked up. You might want to hear this, Sora. Even now, she still called me by my real name when we were alone. What is it? She paused. D&L Financial is being investigated. The audit you asked about? It's leading to something big. Misuse of funds, falsified reports, unpaid taxes. It's all unraveling. I didn't speak right away. I just stared out the window, watching the ocean move like it was breathing with me. Elise, I said finally, let it happen. Don't interfere. Of course, she said softly. You knew this was coming, didn't you? I smiled. No, but I knew he'd give karma a shortcut. For weeks, I followed the news quietly. D&L Financial's reputation crumbled. Investors pulled out, clients disappeared. Lydia, who had once flaunted her designer bags and diamond rings on social media, went silent. Then one morning, a headline made me laugh out loud. D&L Financial CEO accused of fraud. Wife sells jewelry to pay legal fees. Poetic, really. Daniel, the man who once told me I'd have nothing, was losing everything. But I didn't celebrate. I didn't dance or shout. I simply poured myself a cup of tea and whispered, "Balance." Still, I wasn't done. Because revenge wasn't about watching him fall. It was about seeing myself rise. Around that time, the Aurora Foundation began hosting private investor events. Quiet gatherings of business people, philanthropists, and entrepreneurs. I attended everyone. Not as Sora the ex-wife, but as Aurora Lang, the mysterious investor everyone wanted to know more about. I spoke little, observed much, and that's how I learned Daniel was desperate. One evening, during a charity dinner in the city, I overheard two men talking at the next table. "He's applying for private capital again," one said. "No one's touching him. Reputation's poison now." The other chuckled. "He's even trying to sell shares to one of Aurora Lang's subsidiaries." I almost choked on my wine. He didn't know the irony, that I was Aurora Lang, that the company he was begging for help belonged to the woman he discarded. Fate has such exquisite timing. That night, I instructed Elise to approve a meeting. Anonymously, I wanted to see him. Not as Sora, not yet, just to observe. The meeting took place at a private hotel suite. Elise handled everything under Aurora's name. I attended in disguise. Dark hair, glasses, muted tones. No one would recognize me unless they looked closely. And Daniel, he never really looked. He walked in wearing a suit that had seen better days. The confidence was still there, but now it was fragile. Brittle around the edges. "Mr. Reynolds," he greeted Elise, mistaking her for the investor. "It's an honor. I think you'll find D&L Financial still has tremendous potential." He went on about numbers, projections, strategies. All I saw was a man trying to sell the ashes of his own arrogance. At one point, his eyes flicked toward me. "And you are?" I smiled faintly. "Aurora's assistant," I said. "Just here to take notes." He nodded, uninterested, already turning back to Elise. I studied him. The lines on his forehead, the way his hands trembled slightly when he reached for his glass. The ring he'd once flaunted, gone. His watch, a cheaper replacement. When he spoke about his company, I could hear it. The desperation disguised as confidence. The same tone he once used when convincing me to believe in him. By the end of the meeting, Elise politely declined the deal. "Your numbers are unstable," she said carefully. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We just need liquidity. Once the audit clears." Elise stood. "We'll be in touch if circumstances improve." He forced a smile, shook her hand, and left. As he walked past me, he said quietly, "You look familiar." My heart skipped, but I met his gaze with calm eyes. "I get that a lot," and he walked away, just like before. But this time, I didn't crumble. This time, I was the one watching him fade into the background. The next few months were brutal for Daniel. He lost his house, the one I now owned. The irony was delicious. Lydia left him, taking what little remained of his pride. He filed for bankruptcy soon after. And me. I thrived. I bought a second coastal property. A villa overlooking the cliffs, the kind of home that reflected who I'd become. I began partnering with international charities. My story, though hidden, was growing into a movement. Yet despite all the luxury, I stayed grounded because I remembered every cold night, every empty morning, every time I'd thought it was over. I wasn't rich because of luck. I was rich because I endured. One evening, while reviewing foundation reports, I received an email from a local hiring agency I sometimes funded. The subject line made me freeze. Candidate application, Daniel Levington, financial analyst position. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Daniel had applied for a position. At my foundation, Elise called almost immediately. You saw it? I did, I said slowly. What do you want to do? I looked out the window. The ocean glowing gold beneath the sunset. Call him in, I said softly. I think it's time. The day of the interview, I arrived early. My office was bright, minimalist, sunlight spilling across marble floors. Everything about it felt like the opposite of the house he once owned. When Daniel walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. His suit was worn, his hair thinner, his eyes hollow. He looked small. Mr. Levington, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Please, have a seat, he sat, glancing around nervously. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. Tell me, I began. Why do you want to work here? He exhaled. I've made mistakes, he said, but I still believe I can rebuild. I'm not looking for pity, just a chance to prove myself again. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I looked him straight in the eyes. Do you believe people can change? He hesitated. Sometimes, he said, if they lose enough to realize what mattered. I leaned forward. And what mattered to you, Daniel? His name caught him off guard. His eyes widened. Confusion, disbelief, recognition colliding all at once. Sora, he whispered. I smiled faintly. Hello, Daniel. The color drained from his face. You're Aurora Lang, I said, finishing his sentence. Yes, it's an alias. A necessary one. He stood abruptly, stammering. You set this up. The company, the houses, everything. No, I said calmly. I set myself up. You just happened to fall in the same direction. He sank into the chair, silent. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. You look different, he finally said. I am different, I replied. I became who I was always meant to be. Once you stopped standing in my light, he swallowed. I'm sorry, Sora, for everything. I studied him, really studied him. The man who once made me doubt my worth now sat across from me, begging for a chance I didn't even need to grant. It should have felt like victory, but instead, it felt like closure. Daniel, I said softly, this interview is over, but I'll give you something better than a job. He looked up, confused. Forgiveness, I said. You don't deserve it, but I need it. For me, I stood. You can leave now, he did, slowly, quietly, like a man carrying the weight of his own ruins. When the door closed behind him, I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. That was the moment I knew. Revenge was never about making him hurt. It was about proving to myself that I could rise without needing to destroy anyone. And I had. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I poured a glass of wine and walked out to the balcony. The air smelled like sea salt and peace. Daniel was gone from my life. This time for good. And I was finally free. But my story wasn't done yet, because what came next wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about redemption, for me, and for the women who would follow after. I always believed that fate has a strange sense of humor. The same man who once told me I was too naive for business was now unknowingly working for a company partially owned by me. Daniel's world was collapsing, slowly, elegantly, exactly as I'd planned. And yet, there was still one part of me that hadn't let go completely. That part wanted him to see me again. Not to beg, not to apologize, but to witness the woman he threw away. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, at a downtown conference, hosted by one of my foundation's partner firms. Elise thought it would be a good opportunity to show face. I wore a simple white suit, My hair tied up, no heavy makeup, just a clean, sharp confidence that felt like armor. As I walked into the glass atrium, the sound of murmured voices, clinking glasses, and the faint hum of jazz wrapped around me. It was the kind of world Daniel used to own. And now he was just trying to survive in it, and there he was. Across the room, Daniel stood with a small group of investors. He looked different, slimmer, grayer around the temples, his once proud posture now burdened by invisible weight. Lydia wasn't with him. He noticed me first. His gaze lingered a second too long before confusion flickered in his eyes. Then curiosity. He walked over. "Excuse me," he said, voice polite, measured. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" I turned slowly, meeting his eyes. Calm, unbothered. "Perhaps," I said. "I've been around the industry for a while." He smiled faintly, trying to charm. "I'm Daniel Lee. I run D&L Financial." "I know," I said softly. "I've heard of it." For a moment, his smile faltered. My voice. Maybe it reminded him of something. Someone. "Do you work with any of our partner firms?" he asked. "Something like that," I replied. "My name's Aurora Lang." He froze. I could almost see the recognition crawl across his face. Not because he knew who I was, but because he'd heard of me. Everyone had. Aurora Lang, the mysterious investor who'd been acquiring shares of struggling companies, including some of his. "It's a pleasure," he said finally, forcing composure. "I've wanted to meet you. You're making quite a mark lately." "Thank you," I said simply. "I prefer to keep things quiet." He nodded, a flicker of unease in his eyes. "You know, you remind me of someone I used to know." I smiled. "I get that a lot." For the rest of the evening, Daniel hovered around me like a man drawn to a flame he couldn't understand. He asked questions about my investments, my background, my plans. I gave him nothing but half answers and polite smiles. At one point, Elise leaned over and whispered, "He doesn't recognize you." "I know," I murmured. And that's the best part. When the evening ended, Daniel offered to walk me to my car. I declined. "Maybe we could have coffee sometime," he said, almost shyly. "There's something familiar about you." I looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Be careful chasing familiarity, Mr. Lee. Sometimes it leads back to things best left behind." His smile faltered completely then. For just a second, I saw something. Guilt, regret, maybe recognition. But then it was gone. I left the building with my head high, the city lights reflecting off the glass doors behind me. That night, I sat on my balcony again, staring at the waves crashing against the rocks. The air smelled like rain. I thought about what I'd seen. Not just Daniel, but his downfall taking shape in real time. His confidence was cracked, his business unstable, his personal life unraveling. But more than that, I saw something deeper. He was haunted. He didn't know who Aurora Lang really was, but something in me, in the way I carried myself, reminded him of what he'd destroyed. And that, more than money or revenge, was my true victory. Still, I wasn't done. There was one more layer to unfold, one final mirror I wanted to hold up to him. The next week, Elise came to me with news. Daniel's company is desperate for new funding. They're reaching out to private investors to avoid bankruptcy. Want to guess who they've contacted? I smiled slowly. Aurora Foundation. Exactly. It was perfect. Poetic. Almost unreal. "Tell them," I said. "We're interested, but I want to handle the meeting myself." Elise raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said quietly. "It's time." For the first time since I'd been thrown out of that house, I felt no anger, no pain, just purpose. The woman who once begged to be understood was gone. Now there was only Aurora, calm, powerful, and in complete control. And Daniel Lee was about to walk straight into her office, not realizing he was about to negotiate with the ghost of his own past. The day of the meeting arrived cloaked in quiet tension, the kind that sits heavy in your chest, not because you're afraid, but because you know the universe is about to complete a circle. The night before, I barely slept, not from nerves, but from the weight of what this moment meant. For years, I'd dreamed of seeing Daniel again, not as his wife, not as his victim, but as his equal. No, not equal. His mirror, Elise, met me early that morning. Her expression was calm, but her eyes flickered with anticipation. "You don't have to do this in person," she said one last time. "We can handle it remotely." I smiled faintly. No. He took everything from me face to face. He should meet what he created the same way. By the time we reached the conference room, everything was already arranged. A sleek glass table, sunlight streaming through tall windows, the city skyline stretching endlessly beyond. The Aurora Foundation logo glowed subtly on the wall behind me, a symbol of everything I had rebuilt. At precisely 10 o'clock, Daniel walked in. For a moment, time slowed. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him. Lines around his mouth, shadows under his eyes. But his presence still filled the room, like a storm pretending to be a breeze. Behind him, his assistant carried a folder, thick with desperation, their latest proposal to save D&L Financial from ruin. "Ms. Lang," he greeted, forcing a professional smile. "Thank you for meeting with us." "Of course," I replied evenly, gesturing for him to sit. "Please, have a seat." His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. A man fighting to sound in control, while knowing he was not. He began his pitch. Numbers, projections, promises. The same smooth confidence he used to use on clients. And on me. I watched him carefully. Every gesture, every lie disguised as charm. Finally he said, "We're seeking $15 million in capital. In return, we can offer." I interrupted quietly. "Mr. Lee, do you always start meetings this way? Pitching to someone you don't really understand?" He blinked. "Excuse me? You've talked for 15 minutes about what you want," I said, leaning back slightly. "But nothing about what you can offer beyond numbers. Why should I trust you?" He hesitated, thrown off balance. "Because I've built this company from nothing. I've made mistakes, sure, but I've learned." "Oh, I know," I said softly. "You've built, you've lost, you've rebuilt. It's a pattern, isn't it?" He frowned. "You sound like you know me." I met his eyes and smiled. A slow, knowing smile. "Better than you think." He stared at me then, confusion flickering again, like static in his expression. I could see the wheels turning, something in my voice, my manner. It was haunting him. I stood, walking toward the window, my reflection shimmering faintly against the glass. "You know, Daniel," I said, "it's funny. You spend years believing certain people are weak, that their worth depends on you. And then one day, you realize they were never the fragile ones." He stiffened. "How do you know my name?" I turned around. For a long second, I just looked at him. The man who'd taken my home, my dignity, my dreams, and thought I'd disappear. Then quietly, I said, "You told me once that I'd never survive without you." His face went pale. My voice softened, almost tender. "I did more than survive, Daniel. I became the woman who now decides whether your company lives or dies." Silence. Thick. Electric. Heavy. He stared at me. Disbelief flooding his face. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again, like he couldn't quite breathe. "Sora," he whispered. "No, that's not possible." I smiled. "Oh, it's possible." For the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. Not of me, but of what I represented. The past he'd buried had returned, wearing success like armor. He sat down slowly, his voice trembling. You look different." "I am different," I said. You made sure of that. He swallowed hard. Sora, I didn't mean for things to end like that. I raised an eyebrow. You threw me out of my own house, Daniel. You replaced me before the ink on the divorce papers was dry. You called me useless. I was angry. No, I interrupted quietly. You were cruel. He tried to regain composure, leaning forward. If this is about revenge, I laughed, low and calm. Revenge? Oh no, this is business. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to own you. His face drained of color. You see, I continued. Aurora Foundation already holds controlling interest in 2 of your subsidiary accounts. I could bankrupt D&L tomorrow if I wanted, but I won't, because unlike you, I don't destroy what I can transform. He sat there in stunned silence, his world cracking open in slow motion. I placed a folder in front of him. Here's what will happen. I'll buy your company. You'll remain on as an advisor for 1 year. After that, you'll resign quietly. You'll be paid well, of course. I'm not heartless. His voice was barely a whisper. Why? Why not just let me fail? I looked at him steadily. Because failure would make you a victim, and I want you to live long enough to understand what you lost. Tears welled in his eyes. Not from love, not even from guilt, but from the realization that he had created the architect of his own downfall. I never stopped believing in you, he murmured. Even when I left. No, I said coldly. You never believed in me. You just didn't think I could ever stop believing in you. I signed the contract in front of him. Each pen stroke was a quiet act of liberation. When it was done, I stood. Goodbye, Daniel. For what it's worth, I hope you find peace. I already have. I turned and walked out of that room, sunlight spilling across the marble floor like a silent applause. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running from my past. I was standing above it, and behind me, in that glass room, Daniel Lee sat alone, surrounded by papers, numbers, and the faint echo of the woman he never thought would rise again. Owning D&L Financial should have felt like a victory lap, but when the ink dried, I realized something deeper. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was reclamation. Every board meeting, every quarterly review, every signature I gave under the new letterhead wasn't about Daniel. It was about Sora, the woman he thought couldn't survive the storm, now guiding the ship through calmer seas. The first few months were chaos. The company was drowning in debt and corruption that had festered under Daniel's arrogance. I cleaned house quietly, firing executives who siphoned money, restructuring policies, and implementing transparency. Elise and Adrian stood by me through it all, helping rebuild what had once been a hollow empire into something functional, even ethical. It was poetic, really. The foundation Daniel built on deceit now stood on honesty. Daniel remained in his advisor role, quiet and subdued. He attended meetings, never challenging me, rarely speaking at all. The once boastful man had become a ghost in the halls he once ruled. At first I pitied him. Then, slowly, I didn't. I'd offered him grace. He'd have to live with his ghosts alone. But life, as it always does, had one more twist to throw at me. It was late one evening when the receptionist called up to my office. Ms. Lang, there's a woman downstairs. She says her name is Lydia Lee. My pen froze mid-sentence. Lydia. The woman who had stood beside Daniel when he kicked me out. The one who smirked while I cried. Who flaunted her designer heels through my old kitchen as if she'd earned it. I took a deep breath. Send her up. When the elevator doors opened, I barely recognized her. Lydia was no longer the immaculate woman I remembered. Her hair was limp, her face pale, her designer clothes wrinkled. She looked fragile. Sora, she whispered when she saw me. Or do I call you Aurora now? I leaned back in my chair, calm and unbothered. Whichever helps you remember what you did. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm not here to fight. Please, just listen. I said nothing. only gestured for her to sit. She sank into the chair, trembling. "Daniel's gone," she said finally. "Gone? Not dead, just gone. He left 2 weeks ago, took what little money he had left, and disappeared. He's been drinking, blaming himself, blaming me. And She broke off, wiping her tears. "I'm losing everything, the house, the car, everything. I thought maybe you could help." I almost laughed. "Help? You stood by him while he destroyed me. You smiled when he called me worthless." Her voice cracked. "I know, I was stupid. I thought he loved me. But he used me too. When the money ran out, so did the affection. I just wanted to be seen, Sora. I thought if I was perfect, I'd be enough for him. For a moment, I saw the shadow of the woman I once was. Desperate, blind, hungry for validation, and I realized something painful. Lydia wasn't my enemy anymore. She was just the next woman in the cycle Daniel created. Still, my voice stayed steady. "Why come to me?" "Because," she said softly, "you're the only one who ever beat him. You're the only one who made it out." Silence filled the room. The city stretched beyond the windows, its lights flickering like memories. Finally, I said, "Lydia, I can't undo what you've done, but I can offer something different." She looked up, confused. "I run a program through the Aurora Foundation. It helps women rebuild their lives. Housing, therapy, work placements. If you're serious about starting over, I'll enroll you, but not as a favor. You'll earn it." Her lip trembled. "You'd do that?" "After everything?" I nodded. "Because forgiveness isn't for you. It's for me." Lydia began to cry. Not the crocodile tears she once used to manipulate, but something raw, human, she whispered. "Thank you." Over and over until her voice broke. When she left, I sat there in silence for a long time, the city's hum filling the emptiness. It wasn't triumph I felt. It wasn't satisfaction. It was peace. Deep, quiet peace. A week later, I learned that Daniel had sold his last assets and vanished overseas. Some said he was in Singapore, others in Greece. It didn't matter. He was gone. I stood in my office one evening, looking out at the skyline that glittered like a promise kept. I'd built something real. I'd helped women who, like me, were told they were nothing. I'd turned pain into purpose. The cycle had ended, and for the first time in a long, long while, I could breathe. Still, there was one last thing I wanted to do. One final act, not of revenge, but of closure. I decided to visit the farmhouse, the one I'd lived in before everything fell apart, the one that had become both a symbol of pain and rebirth. It was time to go home. The drive back to the farmhouse felt like crossing through time. The city slowly gave way to winding country roads, golden fields, and the familiar smell of soil after rain. Every curve of the road whispered pieces of a life I had long buried. It had been years since I'd last seen it. The place where I once believed love could fix anything. The place I'd left barefoot and broken, clutching nothing but a suitcase and shattered dignity. As I pulled into the long gravel driveway, my chest tightened. The house stood quietly at the end, framed by the same oak trees that had watched my life unravel. But now, the paint gleamed, soft white under the sun. The porch swings swayed gently, and lavender bloomed again along the walkway. It wasn't the same house anymore, and neither was I. When I stepped out of the car, the air smelled of lilac and memory. The silence felt sacred, almost reverent. Inside, the rooms were bright and warm, filled with the kind of peace money could never buy. The walls that once echoed with Daniel's voice were now silent witnesses to my healing. Every corner carried a ghost of my past life. My laughter in the kitchen, the nights I cried on the floor, the mornings I pretended everything was fine. But now, those ghosts felt gentle, forgiven. I walked into what used to be our bedroom. The window still faced the same rolling hills, but now sheer curtains caught the light, dancing softly in the breeze. I sat by the window and let the memories wash over me. The girl who once lived here was gone. She had died the night she was told to leave. But in her place stood a woman who had rebuilt herself from ashes, who had learned that love doesn't always save you, but self-respect always will. As I sat there, I took out something I hadn't looked at in years. A small wooden box I'd found when restoring the house. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a letter I'd written to myself the night before the divorce. The handwriting was shaky, smudged with tears. Dear Sora, if you ever find this, it means you survived. It means the worst didn't break you. Don't forget who you are. Even when they try to take everything from you, you are still whole. You are still enough. I pressed the paper against my heart and closed my eyes. I wanted to tell that broken woman that she'd go on to own empires, that she'd stand in boardrooms wearing power like perfume, that she'd turn pain into purpose and compassion, that she'd forgive. A soft knock pulled me from my thoughts. It was Adrian, my real estate broker turned trusted friend. He'd driven down to check on some final renovations. He smiled gently when he saw my face. You look lighter. I am, I said quietly. He walked to the window beside me. You did it, Sora. You really did it. I looked out at the fields stretching endlessly beyond the house. I didn't do it for revenge, I said. I did it to remember who I was before I forgot myself. We stood in silence for a while, the sun dipping low behind the trees, painting everything gold. Finally, I said, you know, for a long time I thought this place was cursed. But now I see, it wasn't the house that was broken, it was me. And maybe coming back here wasn't about reclaiming property. Maybe it was about reclaiming peace. Adrian nodded softly. What will you do now? I smiled. Live. Later that evening, I stepped outside. The sky had turned lavender and amber, the same colors that once framed my happiest days here. Fireflies blinked between the trees. I walked barefoot through the grass, feeling the earth beneath me, steady, alive, forgiving. At the far end of the garden stood the old oak tree, where Daniel and I had once carved our initials. The carving was weathered now, almost faded. I traced it with my fingers and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me who I never want to be again." Then I took out a small pocket knife and carved one more thing beneath it, Sora, free. As the sun sank behind the horizon, I felt the last of my past dissolve into twilight. The woman who once left this place with nothing had returned not with vengeance, but with grace. I turned toward the house, the porch light glowing warmly in the dark. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was home, and this time, it was truly mine. It's strange how a story that began in ashes can end in peace. I used to think healing meant erasing the past, but I've learned it's about learning to live alongside it, letting it shape you without defining you. A year passed after I returned to the farmhouse. Seasons changed. The lavender bloomed again, the garden flourished, and the nights grew quiet and kind. The farmhouse became not just a symbol of where I'd fallen, but of how I'd risen. The Aurora Foundation continued to grow. We expanded across the country, supporting women who'd been abandoned, betrayed, or left behind. Every story I heard reminded me of my own, but each time it hurt a little less. Because now I wasn't the broken one. I was the hand reaching back. Sometimes I'd drive into the city for meetings. The skyline that once intimidated me now felt small. Just another backdrop to a life I had outgrown. Daniel never returned. Word eventually spread that he was living quietly overseas, doing consulting work for small firms. Some said he was sober now. Some said he wasn't. I didn't look him up. I didn't need to. One evening, Elise and Adrian joined me for dinner at the farmhouse. The table was set on the porch, candles flickering, the air warm with the smell of rosemary and wine. We talked about business, about life, about how everything had changed. At one point, Adrian looked at me and said, You know, Sora, if you ever wrote a book about your life, it'd inspire millions. I laughed softly. Maybe, but I think the best stories are the ones that don't end with revenge. They end with redemption. Elise raised her glass. To redemption then. We clinked glasses under the starlit sky, and for the first time in a long time, I felt no bitterness, no ache, no shadows, just gratitude. Later that night, when everyone left, I walked through the farmhouse one last time before bed. The rooms glowed with warmth, not from chandeliers or marble floors, but from something quieter, presence, peace. I paused in front of the mirror in the hallway. For years, I'd avoided mirrors. They reminded me of the woman who had once begged to be loved. But now, the woman staring back was someone entirely different. Soft, strong, and finally at home in her own reflection. I whispered to her, "You did it. You came back to yourself." And for once, I believed it. The next morning, I wrote a letter. Not to Daniel, not to Lydia, not even to my younger self, but to anyone who had ever been where I was. To the one who's lost everything, I know it feels like the end. I know it feels like you'll never breathe again. But someday, when the storm is over, you'll realize it wasn't destroying you. It was clearing the way for who you were meant to become. Don't chase revenge. Chase peace. Don't seek closure from others. Find it in yourself. Because the truest revenge is living well, quietly, gracefully, powerfully. And when you do, the world will see what survival truly looks like. I sealed the letter and placed it in the drawer of my old desk, not for anyone else to find, but as a promise to myself. Outside, the sunrise spilled over the fields, golden and forgiving. The wind carried the scent of lavender through the open window. I stepped out onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking softly beneath my feet. This was it. Not a fairy tale ending, but something better. A real one. A woman reborn. Not because she sought revenge, but because she chose herself. I watched the horizon and whispered one last time, "Thank you, life, for breaking me just enough to rebuild me right." And with that, I smiled. The kind of smile that only comes when every wound has finally become a story. The camera would fade out there. The image of a woman standing in the morning light, a house behind her, and an entire world ahead. Not Sora, the betrayed wife. Not Aurora, the mysterious investor. But simply, Sora, free, whole, and finally home. All right, everyone. That's all I have for today. If you found this entertaining, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. If you want to watch more, please check out our playlist. Finally, a huge thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace. Before leaving, please hit the subscribe button, comment your thought, and share with your nearest and dearest one. See you in the next one. Until to the next one, stay happy.